Tēnā koutou katoa, and thank you very much, Carolyn, and the Leaders Connect, the opportunity to speak with you all this afternoon. I just thought it was good to kick off by painting a little bit of the picture about our place at Stonefields School, Te Kura o ngā Pārai Pōhatu. So we opened our doors to 48 learners in 2011. Currently we're just over 700 learners, and we've opened the doors. We're sitting in that space right now for 1,050 is what's predicted. So what's a little bit unique about our place is we're incredibly multicultural and feel blessed because of that. We're around about 30% Asian. Of that 30%, 9% Chinese, 6% Māori, 6 to 7% Pacifica. Another point of character, I think, is that we have probably around 50% of our children speak a language other than English at home, the lucky things. And as you wander through Te Kura o ngā Pārai Pōhatu, you'll see a series of innovative learning environments. We call them learning hubs, where multi-year levels of children are, and generally there's 2 year levels in each learning hub. Within those learning hubs, in a typical space, you'll see 3 teachers, although this year we have a few learning hubs where there's just 2 teacher hubs, and some of those 2 teacher hubs work across in a series of 4. So we love our place, we love our kids, they're incredibly diverse. And like I said earlier, actually with Jill, seeing you in the audience, no year's been the same. We've constantly had to iterate as we've grown that, sort of estimated around 100 new learners a year.
Thanks, Sarah. Kia ora koutou. So today we're going to focus very much on collaboration and on high functioning teams. Collaboration is one of Stonefields School's 4 vision principles. There's a considerable volume of evidence and a diverse number of reasons why collaboration benefits both students and teachers. Broadly, these are in 2 categories. Firstly, or directly, the benefits leveraged from understanding how to collaborate effectively. For example, for learners, these are concerned with understanding processes of collaborative problem solving, understanding how and when collaboration might be a useful strategy to apply in their own learning. Often this is tied in with an idea that living in an increasingly complex global context, people will face sort of increasingly wicked problems, if you like, that they're unable to resolve on their own. Secondly, benefits to students that come indirectly from improved teacher practice. This includes teachers' engagement in collaborative inquiry, in collaborative professional learning, identification of how best to leverage their strengths, and how they might best work together in order to meet the needs of all learners. Spin-offs for teachers may also include sort of increased efficacy, job satisfaction, motivation, and general attitude to their work. So undoubtedly there is value in practice that's supported by and grown through increased collaboration. But we do know collaboration is also difficult, and it often transpires that teachers may only hold quite limited experience of having engaged in deep levels of collaboration previously, especially when it's related to student learning. So for school leaders, therefore, it's really likely that we're going to have to engage in some work quite specifically to develop teacher capacity to collaborate effectively. And for schools with ILEs like Stonefields, and as Sarah's pointed out, where teachers are really anticipating working together in teams, this is likely to be doubly important. What we're going to look at next is the idea of teams, and we talk about this idea about teams that hum and teams that don't. Now, as Sarah's mentioned, our teachers work collaboratively in their ILEs. They're often in teams of 3. Inevitably, some groupings are more productive, more effective, and more impactful than others. At Stonefields, we talk about the idea of hubs that hum in a way, as a way of articulating the teams that really get going well. They shift outcomes for learners, they seem to solve problems, they seem to communicate well, and all in all just seem to hum along. Now, some teams get to this stage very, very quickly and quite intuitively. Some more slowly and require a lot more intervention. And some, to be honest, never really quite seem to get there at all. Now, as school leaders, you'll probably recognise this. You'll have worked with teams that hum, some teams that might be a bit more ho-hum, and some teams that don't get there at all, possibly. Now, our observations early on quickly illuminated the idea that teams that were humming seem to have this kind of intangible synergy and team productivity. They were evidenced in their dialogue and motivated to cause learning for their learners in a way that was going beyond the capacity of other teams. This was really reinforced by that concept of collective teacher efficacy that comes out of the work of Eales and Donahue. And, you know, collective teacher efficacy is very much defined as the perceptions and judgments of a group of educators regarding their ability to positively influence student outcomes. Now, Hattie's done some work in this field as well and is reporting that it's got an effect size of 1.57. Now, if you compare that with other myriad teacher, student, school, curricular, teaching and home factors, that's kind of pretty well off the scale. So it's well worth us looking into, and it's well worth investing time into seeing how do we actually achieve that. Now, reflecting on these teams that hum, what becomes apparent to us is the idea that culture, communication, openness to learning, shared understandings, shared systems and social sensitivities need to be in place before that kind of level of collective efficacy really kicks in and the collective work was really having a deep, deep impact. So we're going to be unpacking today a little bit about what we've learned over this process and some of those things that we think actually can help support teachers in that work.
So the model we're about to show you, I think, is really been developed by working alongside teams, and particularly probably we've learned most from those teams that haven't been as high functioning. So here you can see this circle that was coming up with really what are the key elements or the ideas that underpin these high functioning teams. So on that top left, you can see this idea of team function. You know, importantly, teams committing and having time to be able to meet with one another is a really critical part of a team's success. Having the communication mechanisms, understanding the preferences and how people like to be communicated with, the systems that allow them to have the accountability, meet those deadlines, etc. On that right-hand side, you can see this idea of enabling conditions or a social sensitivity, almost the subculture of the team and the norms that underpin how they work. You know, the integrity piece of following through and doing what you say you're going to do. Having those conversations around, do you need your trust to be earned? Or do you hand that over? How is trust going to be talked about and plussed and earned in that particular team? And are our school-wide values being really, really lived through the way we are cohabitating, if you like, in that space? So often in new teams, we find quite a bit of time it takes to build that function and that social sensitivity to move into that bottom right hand side where teams can then really start to get on and do that real work that they need to do together. Things like being really evidenced and data driven around how they might organise the learners for learning, thinking really carefully about the learning design that's being impactful and what they're going to do moving forward. Student support learners, IEPs, facilitating, thinking about priority learners and ensuring that that learning design is really real and impactful. And on that bottom left-hand side really is where we start to see a real synergetic level of a team function. They really become strength-based. They know one another inside and out. They know what one another is, what one another isn't. They're up for those really challenging, robust conversations and being innovative, pushing boundaries and seeing how they can realise whatever it takes for the young people that they influence and teach. The other thing you'll notice in this model, at the real centre, we find to really get into that we space and to really hum, we are calling on this quite deep level of self-awareness, individuals coming to the table with a growth mindset and being that learner, not a knower. Sounds subtle, but it is important that you know some stuff, I guess, but we'd far rather see people that it's what you do with what you know that matters most. So that building that I part of the learner, teacher, moving them to be able to be really effective in the we space. And you can see those values and vision through there. And as Chris has alluded to, that collective efficacy. So what we're going to do now is take a little bit of a pause, and we'd like you to have a wee think about that model that we've just shared, and think about what aspects do you typically see that may come unstuck in the teams that you're either a part of or you lead and influence? Where does that underperformance surface? And you may then in your breakouts like to talk about examples of interventions in your own context that have been really successful at moving that team function from just being good to that level of great.
Look, what we'll do now is we're going to spend a few minutes talking about a few tools that we've developed in order to support some of that work to help build team function at Stonefields.
So I'm going to share a little story around a team we were working with a number of years ago now, and they were really quite at the dysfunctional end. They weren't making time to meet. They were really starting to avoid one another. They were starting to be quite isolated in the learning hub and where they were positioned. So they were very separate. And we pulled the team together to start making some meaning and making some sense about what was going on for the team. And we started to just sketch out on paper some of the phenomenon that were happening. And there were some big, if you like, elephants growing in this particular hub, and that we started to think about what are the collaboration enablers that help to plus trust. So we had individuals in this particular team that really couldn't have the conversations that needed to be had. And because time was just tracking on, this something that was quite small was starting to grow bigger and bigger and bigger, and then was almost impossible. On the right-hand side, there's, gosh, there must be 15, 20 of these particular conversation starters. You can see that sort of that balance between when do you address what's getting up your nose and when might you value that diversity and difference and the different perspective. So some of the other types of trust pluses that are created is helping teams to start to say, you know, are we a team that needs the trust earned? Or do we give that trust? Where do you sit on that continuum? Another one, you know, are we feeling that we're really open to further learning or quite defensive about new ideas? Another example could be, you know, when conflict does arise, which is inevitable in a team, are you an individual to do something about that or not? So we've felt by having these little artifacts, if you like, they can be put on the table at team meetings or at hub meetings where it can start those conversations to make sure the hard to talk about stuff is surfaced.
Thanks, Sarah. Another of the tools we've used to get feedback really and to sort of take the temperature, if you like, of what's going on is to test the condition of the culture and through staff surveys. There's a range of questions that we ask our staff, including things like whether or not there's a good sense of their team in the hub, to what extent that they feel their team is working effectively, how much they enjoy coming into school to work with their team on a day-to-day basis. And we ask them to rate these on a sort of a 4-point scale, going from sort of strongly disagree down to up to strongly agree.
And important, there's no fence sitting allowed.
No fence, so you can't be kind of in the middle. Sort of, yeah, a ho hum. Yeah. So you've got to be, yeah, you've got to put your line in the sand, really. And look, we've had days, sort of years when the data's been really good, and it's given us great feedback, and then we've had other years when it's not been so good, and we've picked up on that as the feedback as well. At the moment, things are going really well, considering it's been a year of COVID and a very different sense of team in a way, but in some senses it's actually increased the teacher efficacy really through the work they've been doing all through lockdown. So at the moment our reading is 3.72, which is out of a maximum of 4. We're pretty pleased with. As a way of just taking the temperature of the climate, it's been really positive. Look, we've learned that teams work really well when there's a shared sense of purpose, sort of common understandings, that have openness to learning, and have good communications. And we've developed a number of different scaffolds really to help support teachers in this work. These are really good on an ongoing basis, but particularly come into play when things aren't going so well. One of the examples is the use of hub agreements, or mates agreements, you may have heard of, that's mutually agreed team expectations, as they're sometimes known. And these are really agreements that are co-constructed by teams in order to set out joint expectations and agreed ways of working together. And note, it's interesting, the emphasis of these is generally less on sort of pedagogical philosophies and more on just the nuts and bolts of working together every day. And our experience is that the collaboration is much more likely to break down and cause dysfunction over things like untidiness or poor timeliness or non-attendance at things than it is over philosophical differences about a particular pedagogical approach. So agreements sort of spell things out that, in a way it's trying to make the implicit explicit by saying things like, well, when are we going to meet? What sort of decisions do we need to make about the use of our time during non-contact time? How do we communicate with parents? We just clarify who's doing that and what are the different roles we have in that process. Sometimes it breaks down even further into meeting protocols, and there's good evidence that meeting protocols, it's not the same as hard and fast rules, but meeting protocols can really support collaborative work with teachers. So little things like making sure everyone has a chance to speak, trying not to talk over one another, being on time, being there, being present, and following up on actions are really good sort of statements to set up in advance. Now, obviously, agreements like this are no good if the only time you look at it is when you make it and you never go back to it. So obviously, teams are encouraged to use that as a review document, as a review process as they go on. And look, we found out you can create these documents and you can sort of start provocations really for these in quite fun ways, whether you're playing charades with them and coming up with different scenarios and acting things out, then it's we found that to be really successful. But the teams that seem most successful have a pretty good understanding of where they sit, their roles, their relationships, and what to do when things aren't working so well. But we don't just because it's collaborative, we don't want people all thinking the same. Part of the beauty of strong collaborative relationships is that you build on that diversity and difference and strength. Otherwise, why would you collaborate in the first place? It's just a matter of how much of that, how much rub do you want really? So we also find that surfacing beliefs and assumptions has been really effective exercise. Do we know what beliefs others are really drawn to or hold firm to, or that influence their practice? How might these beliefs manifest themselves day to day, and what's the impact of that? We look at this idea of continuums, once again going from strongly disagree to agree, and this you can do as a paper task, or it's more fun really to do as a physical task where people are standing along a continuum in the learning hub. But asking people to sort of say, well, where do you stand on this? Literally, children should be allowed to use the staff room, or they should be allowed to call their teachers by their first name. These are nice little easy ways into these conversations. Cats better than dogs. But then you can start drawing down into some of the things that you think are more valuable in your own context that are possibly slightly contentious, and where do people sit? And it's a good way of setting up conversations, because if you've got two people that sit in the, working together in a team, and they're both on, people are on opposite ends of the continuum, that's potentially going to lead to a bit of rub over time. So actually preempting that and start thinking, okay, how do we actually manage this, and how do we actually come together and actually work out where do we stand as a team, can really be really useful. Obviously, the intention is to develop a culture of openness where people feel really comfortable to raise concerns, to share their beliefs and ideas, but also have the skills to address them as they go along.
So we would say that the number one capability we would intentionally build in any staff member that comes to Stonefields School is what we term sense making. You'll have heard of others talking about the robust conversations, open to learning conversations, hard to have conversations. Or as you can see here, this woman, Judith Glasser from Boston, talks about building this conversational intelligence. So we want, as Chris alluded to, that real psychological safety, and we want to thank people for raising things that may be hard to raise. So, conflict is inevitable when you're in shared spaces working with other people. I just think about my relationship with my partner and which way the toilet roll is going to hang, can start have a pretty interesting conversation sometimes, or very surface in the leadership hub thing getting up my nose at the moment, Chris, is that it seems to be the girls are always the ones to tidy up the leadership table and the boys bugger off. But they're the sorts of things we talk about so that we're getting those norms together and that we're all paying attention to that.
That example was purely hypothetical.
I just came to my mind because I left and I was frustrated and I thought I'm going to need to raise it with the team. Anyway, moving right along.
Okay. I will carry on this, otherwise I could go and tidy up the staff up, but I will carry on. We probably identify there's sort of 3 levels of conflict when it comes down to the things that go on at a collaborative team level and sort of more flowing through to an organisational level. Firstly is the personal level, as Sarah said, the things that get up your nose, the annoying things, the quite often interpersonal tensions that arise from close proximity and not tidying up the mugs in the sink. And if we know that if these aren't addressed in a timely manner, much like the proverbial snowball rolling down the hill and down the hill, these can sort of escalate and grow, and suddenly they become bigger than Ben-Hur. Some of those little scenarios might be, people in the meetings that never say anything. And so you're thinking, I'm not sure what they're thinking. I don't know what their viewpoint is. I don't know what their contribution is. Having situations where it's the same people that are always late to meetings, or the same people that are always not tidying up, or like comments that team meetings are a bit boring and they're full of admin, and when are we going to get to the decent stuff? Or comments from staff are saying, well, we've got somebody that just talks so much that we don't actually get a word in. So we find that these are the things that they're the niggly things, if you like, that start off sometimes quite early, and unless you kind of nip them in the bud, so to speak, they can grow. Secondly, at the operational level at school is the emergence of incongruences that emerged in that sort of gap, if you like, between espoused belief and enacted practices. An example might be that there's an organisational belief and a vision around building agency in students, but in practice, there's lots of aspects where that student choice is reduced for whatever reason, and so it's not the practice isn't following through on the belief, or another one example might be that the espoused belief is that everyone is responsible for everybody in the hub. But when you actually watch and you observe and you see what's going on, it's actually teachers are actually pretty well taking responsibility for one cohort of students at the expense of the others. So it's really that's where the gap comes in between the espoused belief and the practice. Now, some of these things creep in as default practices. Thompson talks about that, the idea that we default to things over time, sometimes a response to competing demands or pressures, or just because we default back into places that we're more comfortable in. Although less evident as conflict, it can sometimes be default into suddenly becoming the way we do things around here. And that may not actually be the way we really want to be doing things around here, or that we espouse that we are. Thirdly, at a cultural level in school, really, incongruences become undiscussables or non-discussables. Roland Barthes talks about this idea about the ideas that creep in insidiously and then inadvertently become enmeshed in the culture of school. It could be, for example, about the way decisions are made, who's included, who's always excluded, about the timeliness of communications or the nature of them, shifting expectations or the nature or the lack of confidentiality. So to Barthes, he talks about that idea of the health of a school. I'll just give you a moment just to have a read of this, because it is a really useful it's a useful idea. So Barthes talks about naming things, talks about naming those non-discussables, recognizing and responding to them so that they are addressed, and that addressing them actually becomes part of the culture rather than the non-discussables themselves. Is actually, here's a place where actually everything's on the table. You can talk to these things so that they don't become part of the culture. So we find that idea of those undiscussables is really strong. We put a link to Roland Barth's paper, The Culture Builder, in the notes that come out. It's a really good and pretty quick read. With that in mind, we'll jump into breakout 2 and ask you to think about something that gets up your nose at school, an emerging incongruence, or maybe even an undiscussable in your context. And then to start thinking about, well, what do you do to build your own and those you lead capability and capacity to do something about it rather than doing nothing about the situation?
So we've come to view conflict as a really, really good thing. And it's inevitable when you're working so closely with others in that shared team space. And we think it's just simply, any conflict is actually a point of difference. So if Chris has a perspective on something that's different to my own, there's this beautiful space between us if we're willing to engage in that conversation where further learning can happen. So that point of difference usually is a result of different perspective, a different experience, a different value potentially, something that they might believe is different. It could even be a mental model or a way that the world is viewed. So encouraging people to step in and lean in and be curious around different perspectives or beliefs that people hold means that you come out better off because you've learned as a result of sincerely listening to that particular person. So here you can see a little snippet of the continuums or progressions that sit behind that model around high functioning teams that we shared with you earlier. So specifically through coaching and expert people in this high functioning space, they will work with teams. Teams can highlight where they think they might be. They will think about where they want to be, and there's a really rich conversation and unpacking, well, what are we going to do to move from where we currently are to that next space?
So we know that our highest functioning teams, they leverage their strengths. They use their time well and efficiently, and if you like, develop a literacy of collaboration and collaborative processes that enables them to determine what they work together on and what do they do on their own, what do they just collaborate on, and what do they sort of just get coordinated between them. And we see that those conversations, deciding how to work together, how to communicate with each other, reap dividends as we go through. That real clarity on collaboration and what it is that they're going to work on. It's a great pleasure this afternoon to introduce a live real team, Ollie Baker and Hope Griffin, who are you're going to come in here?
Okay.
Yes, who are a year 7-8 team from Learning Hub 14, who are going to come and talk a little bit about their experiences.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Nice to see you all in tiny little boxes.
Hi.
So my name is Ollie. I've been teaching at Stonefields about 7 years now, and I have a passion in video games, and I currently teach in year 7-8.
And my name is Hope, and I've only been working at Stonefields since midway through last year. So we thought we would just start with a little context, bit of background about how we came to work together. As we've said, we've only been together, working together for this year. And Ollie has had, so I came in and we didn't know each other before this year, we hadn't worked together. And I came in and Ollie had very strong relationships already with the learners in our hub because he's come up the school with lots of them. So already had lots of strong relationships. So at the beginning of the year, I found it quite intimidating to start working with Ollie because, as he says, he's a foundation staff member from Stonefields and has been working here for many years. But over the course of the year, we've found we've got a really strong working relationship, and we want to share with you some things that we do in order for that to work.
So I think it's really, really important that you share openly, honestly, what you are and what you're not. And I think that can be really, really challenging for different people depending on their narrative. But I think obviously working so close with each other, like I see more of Hope than I do with my partner, and vice versa. It's like a marriage. And that marriage can either obviously be really productive, or it can be ending in divorce and alimony paid to lots of children. So I think that trust, obviously, what you are, my strengths are that I have fantastic relationships with kids. I can find some of the time management things a bit challenging, and I'm open about that in the organizational, but also being open about that is that also I'm willing to work on that, and I showcase that, because if I claim not to be okay, that Hope would find out that was a challenge still, that would it become visible on the hub, and it sets like a precedent. I think it's also really important to discuss at the start of the year if you're someone who trusts someone innately, or if someone has to earn your trust. I said to Hope, and I say this to everyone I work with, I said, look, I don't trust you at the start of the year. I'm sorry. You can,
which was also quite intimidating to start with.
You can talk to the cows come home about your practice, but I need to see you with the kids.
Yeah.
That, for me, that is a real touchstone for me. And so I was really clear about how trust was earned for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And as Ollie says, I feel like before you build a strong team, you have to know yourself really well. And as Ollie says, we built up trust by knowing what we do well and what we don't do as well. So Ollie is very good he's a very creative thinker, and also we know each other very well now, so we can talk about each other. Ollie is a very creative thinker and sort of generates lots of ideas, whereas I'm more of a practical thinker and turn those ideas into action. So we're also very different in how we operate as well. So that's something. But what we have that's similar from the very beginning of the year, like in everything we do, we put our learners first.
Yeah.
And everyone can come to work sometimes and not have had a good evening before, but every single day we put our learners first, and we have really high expectations for our learners in our hub. So
I think that value alignment is really important. If we're here for the same reasons, and I basically expect everyone I work with at school to put learners first, that's the nature of the job. I think it underpins the team function, the team system. If we look at our team function part, we put our learners first. Hope and I are probably in one of the rare categories that we both don't have children. So things like that, talking about those other commitments that you do have out of school, and actually when you are going to meet for meetings and you're going to put that time into it. When I first started here, I was like, why are we putting so much time into expectations around meetings and things? Isn't it just because you just do it? But for different people with different things on top, that's actually really important to go, hey, I need to leave at 3:15 today because I've got the kids. Or what happens when someone's sick? So that's really, really important to actually get those team systems working. If you kind of create that shared expectation of what that looks like, and then adhere to that, because obviously it maximizes their learning. Yeah.
I think at the start of the year, we had a good solid foundation. And then, as we all know, COVID hit. And for that was something that we think, reflecting before this presentation today, was what kind of cemented our working relationship and how we got to know each other even better. Even though we were virtual, we kind of had the opportunity to stop and reflect, and through online meetings and things, we kind of gained even more trust into how each other work.
It's that crisis point, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where we experienced a trauma that was significant for us and was significant for our learners, and we had to do something differently. And through that, we were able to come together, rely on our strengths for our shared mindsets, and actually create something that I don't think we could have created on our own. That was opportunity to show trust in each other and to put trust in each other. And obviously, you can't artificially create a crisis for every single team, but for those teams where nothing goes wrong, and I've been in teams before, I've been very lucky to be in teams a part of that have always worked, but I don't think I've always been in teams that have strived for that excellence, that have strived for that next step and think actually blue sky picture, hey, our kids are great, what could we achieve? Whereas this year, I feel that with COVID and with the sort of the wonderful unique challenges that's given us, that actually we have gone bigger. And so I guess you can't obviously always enforce a pandemic.
Viewing challenges, however big or small, viewing them as opportunities as well, like is something that's really important.
I think probably one of the challenges that we're reflecting on recently is we have become quite close friends as part of this. And so we didn't start off as friends, but we have become, you know, more than just colleagues. We actually are really good friends. So how do we mitigate that as well, especially when next year we're going to have a third person in our hub? And how do we put some of that friendship aside and actually say, hey, how are we making this still not the way unprofessional friendship, I mean, but you know, when you do go close with somebody, how do you think actually are we still pushing ourselves? Are we still challenging?
Yeah.
And I think the important thing is probably something for us to reflect on. 2 minutes, okay. Next year, how are we always hopping into each other's lessons and saying, hey, you know, did you notice that when, and seeing this opportunity, but because we're coming from that place of respect, mutual respect, when we do critique each other, it can still be hard because we've got high expectations of each other, and we feel quite sensitive sometimes, but we're getting a little bit into that.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. And I think that's one of our challenges for next year, and opportunity as well, is first of all, welcoming a new team member and changing our dynamic and making sure that we you know, involve them as much as possible, but also we need to make sure that we are challenging ourselves to do what the other person is good at. For example, like Ollie's very good at challenging our higher writers, and I'm very good at challenging our higher mathematicians. So kind of swapping over and giving each other opportunities to stretch our own practice is something that we're definitely bringing into.
I think possibly it's really good to talk about this relationship with the kids as well, to talk about, hey, Miss Griffin, I noticed that when this is actually modeling that language of learning with learners, or modeling that collaborative, you know, we can work together. Miss Griffin did this and I did this. That's how we came together. It's our kids, I think, don't have a view of collaboration as I work with my friends. And so it's how do we actually model that process with them and give them those fundamental building blocks. So to wrap up, obviously, I think being really open about what you are and what you're not, because people will find out anyway, and you can't make people do that. But I think the longer I've been at this school, the more I realize actually we teach in this wonderful fishbowl environment where we're all on show, and that's brilliant because there's so much chance for collaboration. So being upfront and honest at the start does help, but I know that's a different narrative for everyone. Understanding people's narrative as well, where you've come from and what's on top and why you might react so so well to some things, or is no one wakes up in the morning to do a shit job, sorry, bad job. No one wants to come to school like that.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Nice to chat.
Nothing like having the live team. When the rubber hits the road, it's what it's all about. So really that brings us to an end. So Carolyn, I was just going to hand back to you.
Did you want to talk about the Stonefields Collaborative just quickly?
Oh, I would love to, just quickly. And there's a beautiful quote that you might enjoy. I'll just give you a moment to read that. And you certainly heard from Hope and Ollie the importance of their relationship and how that's grown both personally and professionally. And just a quick 1 minute background around the Collaborative Trust. This emerged really out of people wanting to come and visit the school, and I think it was the new buildings in the beginning, and then people were interested in the pedagogy and what was happening, and we actually thought we weren't doing a very good job of that. So we decided to start a collaborative trust where we could be more bespoke in meeting people's needs and coming together to collaborate on similar problems. So there's this mutually beneficial opportunity. So the Stonefields Collaborative is PLD accredited as an MOE PLD provider, and we've got facilitators that implement work in areas like learner agency, local curriculum, collaboration and culture, innovative learning environments, to name a few. And we also have these visits where people can come, but we also work alongside in a professional learning sense. And we also have been gifted an app called School Talk, which was an absolute, it was a blessing in disguise during COVID because it was seamless for our children. They were physically here or virtually, which really ties together teaching, learning and assessment, and where our teachers do their design. It's our real-time reporting that's formative with parents, and a real partnership approach for kids seeing where they are in their learning and what's next. So that's just a little bit about the philanthropic arm of the school, and we've got some stunning trustees that really believe in that work and what it's doing. So we're just starting to ramp that up.